I have a lot of passion. IMRT, the days when that was one of my passions, and I wrote a book at the end. I'll show you the book on the IMRT. It's fortunate for me to just share some knowledge with some of young people and throughout the world. I see that a lot of people from Africa and Latin America and other places. Thanks to Rayos Contra Center, I don't know who they are, but in any way, I think they had organized these seminars. And they had given me a huge laundry list of the things to cover in 1 hour, which is impossible. So I took liberty to just provide you only things which may matter to you and a lot of anecdotal things that you might be hearing one way or other, and they may not be true or they may be true. So I'm just going to stay with the theme that I think it may be pertinent, but if there is a more talks needed on various topics, we can discuss that. So the outline is, I preface this one is the fundamentals of IMRT and VMAT. I think everybody knows, but still a lot of people have some misconceptions. So I want to just talk about fundamentals. Treatment plan approaches for different sites. That is a misnomer, because if you know about riding a bike, whether you are riding on a lake shore or a mountain, it's the same thing. So the IMRT of different disease is not anything new. If you know how to do IMRT, you should be able to do it, except there are some changes that we need to. There is other things is that choice of energy for different sites. I think we'll talk about that. Plan quality. And I was just told that I have to cover TG203 on the pacemaker, which does not fit, but I'll have 1 or 2 slides on that. So you guys can interrupt me whenever you have time, and I will be happy to answer the questions. We don't have to stay 1 hour, but we will see. I'll try to wrap up, and I'll answer as many questions at the end. So let's talk about that. In terms of the conflict of interest, I have no conflict of interest giving this talk, except I just love the flowers. Okay, so IMRT plans are unique in the sense that from our traditional views of plans, IMRT can give you different dose at different place. So simultaneous boost and things like that can be done. So just an example here, this is a prostate and lymph nodes, and you can see that actually do such a nice painting, dose painting in any complex scenarios. Now, same thing for a head and neck case you see here, is that we can create very nice painting areas where we want. So this is ipsilateral disease that we want to treat. So these kind of possibilities in 3D is not possible. And that's what I'm going to show you, that how you're going to achieve, what is the mechanism that you're going to achieve, and all that. So we'll talk about that. Going back in time, everybody wished that they had a magic bullet that they can only treat the target and not treat anything else. So the first person which goes the credit is Brahmi. Brahmi was the one who mathematically proved that if we don't make a uniform beam, if you go think about these possibilities in the beam's eye view, and I see the tumor and I also see the organ at risk, then I should be able to back project that, and I should be able to give that dose based on the ray tracing. So depending upon the ray tracing, I should be able to get the attenuations and as also the sparing of the structure. So this was the concept in very early that Brahmi, he actually provided. And actually it is the first paper on this subject, and he provided that we can actually deliver those to the structures. But then to do that, our original concept of the flat beam does not exist. So see here, to provide this dose distribution, our back projected profile has to be a very different, in this case, different. And so you see on this one here that every beam angle, the back projected profile will be different. and not like in old days. So going back to this particular slides again, how the back projection was done and how the intensity are derived. These are a lot of figures put in here, but mathematically you can derive that way. And once you mathematically derive these histograms in the beam side view, then you can either make a cerebent blocks, or you can use the multi-leaf collimators, or you can use the puzzles. You can just put that and these were the beginning of the IMRT. In fact, the first IMRTs were the Corvus, where it was a binary MLCs and it was just doing exactly what you see over here. Now, things change over time. We actually made two types of planning. One is the forward planning, and the other one is the universe planning. And I'll talk more about the universe planning. In the universe planning, we must have, this is a must have structures. That means we must have a target and we must have organ at risk. If we don't have those two, then the universe planning is meaningless. There's no universe planning, or there's no concept modulations, because you have to have that structure. Then we have to create, instead of big beam or field, we have to split them in the different beamlets. Let's call it a small beamlets. I mean, they're not the field size, but it's small. The other thing is we have to worry about the intensity level in each of those places. And then cost functions. The cost functions is, we'll talk about optimization, segmentations, and all that thing.
Hi, Dr. Das. Let me pause you for a minute. Somebody says they cannot see your screen. Let this person sort of like log back in and see if they see a screen. But let me ask everyone else, do you see Dr. Das's screen? So I just want to troubleshoot to make sure it's a local problem and not a universal problem. Okay. So
you can see, yeah. You can see, am I right?
Yeah, everybody says they can see, so I will help this person troubleshoot and then we can continue. All right, you can carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So in early days, there were many IMRT, static, which we used to call it step and shoot. And then at that time, the Siemens, Varian, and Electra, they were. Then there was a dynamic, which was sliding window. It was only Varian at that time. It was providing rotational, sorry, too fast. Rotational, which was a sequential tomotherapy mimic. It's historical now. And then IMAT, I'm not going to talk about the IMAT. I'm not going to talk about tomotherapy and other aspects that they're all there and you can actually. So let me just explain a little bit about the 3D CRT and IMRT. Obviously, 3D CRT is very, very simple, and it is a complex. A couple of things that you need to know. One is that 3D is the forward calculations, and IMRT is inverse calculation. We'll talk about that, what that means. The other things too is that in a 3D, you really don't need to know about the dose volume constraints, which in IMRT, you must have a dose volume constraint. That means you need to know where the doses are going. In this one, uniform fluence, the beam has to be uniform. This is non-uniform. And a lot of other stuff. That the other important thing is that 3D CRT is an analog dose distributions, whereas the IMRT is the digital dose distributions. And I will talk about that a little bit, what I mean by digital dose distribution. So during ICRU 50, when they published the about and volume, the PTV concept actually came from ICRU 50 and it was modified a little bit in ICRU 62. At that time, it was the 3D CRT era, and then we wanted to have uniform dose distributions in the PTV, and they wanted us to report the dose to the isocenter. That actually has changed in IMRT. This slide is a little bit older. Actually, today, IMRT represents around 60% of the radiation treatment with some, I mean, it depends on the institution, but just approximately 60%. It is non-uniform. That means you are painting the dose, and it is a lot of variations in the dose because of the gradient. And isocentric dose is a meaningless thing, and there are other consequences of the biological consequences of the high dose at one point, a low dose at another point, but nobody has cared about that aspect of it. So the difference between 3D CRT and IMRT, as you see that in 3D CRT, beam has to be uniform. And that's what we have been taught, that beam has to be uniform. But if I'm going to block a structure here, then I can put the blocks here in the beam and then it will become non-uniform. But this is not the intensity modulation. This is totally different thing. It's you're putting a block or MLCs. Whereas in IMRT, every field is a different and this is non-uniform. So just to show you that. So the factors that affects the IMRTs are various. Obviously, volume, the treatment planning system, calculation, grid size, algorithms, constraints, cost functions, and some of the other things that I'll talk a little bit more about. Let's talk a little bit about, I was talking to you about the digital dose. To talk about a digital dose, we have to think about what the digital mean to you. So think about that you have a CT data, and inside the CT is a particular slice that's made of pixels. A pixel is a picture element, and that elements are making that particular picture. Typically, that pixel size is 2 millimeters by 2 millimeters, but now modern, it's 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter. And then when you stack these images, the axial images, then depend on how far you are from one slice to other slice, from this to this added to the pixel, that will become a volume, and that's called voxel. That is volume element. So pixel and then distance between two slices, they add up, that gives you voxel. So that's the voxel concept is there. In old days, we used to think about a pixel, the beam element, but the pixel didn't span out. No more, nobody used the word pixel. Rather, everybody used the term beamlet. So pixel and beamlet. So just something to think about, that concept. Couple of more terminologies, and I'll move forward with these. In IMRT, because the way we solve the equations, the beams have to be non-opposing. And uh, people used to think that it has to be odd number of beams, but that's not true. You can have even numbers of beam, but it has to be non-opposing. If it is opposing beam, then it's the solutions are the same and you're not going to get any. And it can be coplanar or non-coplanar. And then beams were divided into many, many beams, which we call it beamlets. And they are the building block of the building block for a segment. So segments, so let me just tell you a little bit about here. So these are the beamlets. And once you collect all those beamlets in a single entity with the same monitor unit, that will be called segment. So segment is collection of beamlets that have the same monitor unit. So in a beam, you may have many segments, and then in each segment, there are many, many beamlets, many, many pixels. So that's what I'm trying to explain you. And the label stands for intensity level, and that's how you are painting. So for example, in this paint here, it's one level of paint, this one 2 level, 3 level, 4 level, 5. These are different levels of paint. That means different levels of radiation. And when I add them up, then it will form a structures for that segments that will provide a different level of the dose in the structure. So just think about that way, that the beamlets, segments, and intensity levels, they are intricate, and you need to know the differences in that aspect. What about the dose level and painting? Obviously, I said that the slices are divided into pixels, and each pixels, you can put a different dose, because I'm talking about the digital dose. And once I'm talking about the digital dose, that means I can take individual pixels and I can give different dose or different whatsoever we want to do. So for example, I put 0, 0 here, 1, 1 here, 1, and all that thing, and these. Add them up, it will comprise your final dose level. So for level up to 4, that's how the dose distribution will look like in the final form. And that's how you see at ultimately the dose level you see. Calculations are important. Obviously, the grid size and voxel size are very important. And these are some older slides that exponentially rises. So if you reduce the grid size, the time of calculations are very, very large. In old days, we used to do the 5 by 5 calculations, used to take several hours. Now you can seconds. But just think about it's a computer. As you decrease the grid size, the calculation time increases quite significantly. I think I said that. So let's. Sorry, what's happening here? Okay, so the process for IMRT, it's a complex. It's just imagine a beautiful flower, because as I told you at the very beginning that you can do the painting, dose painting. How you're going to do it, and these are some requirements that we have to do, is that target volumes. You must have a target volume. Before that, you must have imaging. So the imaging is a critical thing, CT, MRI, mainly CT. We'll talk about that. DVH constraints. If you don't have constraints, you can't do IMRT. Inverse planning, beamlets and sequencing, transfers, phantom plans, Q, all that treat, record and verify. So that's the process. But I think the critical component are stated here. The segmentations. The segmentation is that if you have the CT data sets as we showed, and then if you have drawn the PTV here, you are going to make sure that this PTV is segmented properly, because you're going to put the dose in these bins or in this idea. Remember that I was telling you that you can take individual pixel or voxel and you can put the dose. So you have to do that. And to make this a good, you need to have a smaller and a smaller grid sizes. That is important part of it. So in segmentations, it actually collects the beamlets and then it provides the same intensity. And then otherwise, you won't be able to deliver that segment, because the moment you have different monitor units, will become too different. And if you actually look at it, the Fluence Map, that's how it will be. You can see that these are digital in nature. They are in various intensity levels at that point that you can see here. Now, going back to what I meant by fields are the beamlets. So what happens that, so field, a IMRT field may look like this, but this IMRT field can be split into many, many ways depending upon the intensity level. So this has one intensity level. This one has a different, this has different. And so each IMRT field are divided into many segments with the same monitor units. And that's how the computer does the segmentation. They divide it, and then once they calculate, then they come up with what will be the thing. So that's what I'm showing you. In terms of the calculations, again, it is very, very important for physicists to understand that how much efforts the computer has to do. So for example, if I have 10 by 10 or 1 centimeter by 1 centimeters, I mean, it will, and if I have a 5 level, so it will be 500. But if you are 2 by 2, it will be 12,500. So there's a very large amount of segmentations that comes up. And then actually on the screen, on a computer, some of the computers will show you some of them. So for example, for this case, it has created 3,300, and then it's going to that 5,600. But in anyway, these are all just internal now. That coming to the cost function, what is a cost function? Cost function is a mathematical jargon for the inverse planning, simulated annealing, and that is that you wish that you can get that. So this is your wish, and this is the calculated. You square them, put some kind of a weighting, and sum them up in the 3 dimensions, this number has to be minimum. That is what that cost functions meant in a very layman term. So you wish that my voxel should get this much dose, you calculate, you get that, and you are going. This minimization is a science itself. It's called simulated annealing, and it is done in every life. Plane flying from Zambia to New York, it has to minimize the stock markets, they minimize the risk. Everything is used mathematically, and here in physics, in medical physics, we minimize the cost functions accordingly. Where you're going to get those cost functions, obviously, we'll talk about that a little bit. And the minimization to be done in 3D or 2D. Simple 2D minimization is easy, but it has to be 3D as we see here. Example is in minimization. It's basically computer is iteratively searching for a minimum. So let's suppose this is a two-dimensional function. And in this two-dimensional function, here's a cost function. And here is a point A, and here is a point B. And if we go by the pure Newtonian optimizations, this red point in space, it will travel through, it will come here, it will go up to here, and then it will come. I think somehow but anyway, you see the point that it finds the minimum here. But here is another scenario. If I have a stochastic, I have any randomness, or if I have some error in my functions, then what will happen is that that function is not going to reach point A, but rather it's going to reach to the point B, and this is suboptimum. So whenever we have that, I mean, nothing is Newtonian, everything is stochastic. And so there is always going to be the problem that you can never get the true minimum. What that means that the Afia does the plan and I do the plan, going to get two different plans because different functions. We'll have two different, and we'll never reach to that point. But that's the art that we have to agree on. The constraints.
Dr. Das, before you start the slide, I think there was something I did not ask you. Do you want to field questions after the end of your talk, or
yeah, let's put it at the end.
Okay.
Just compile all the questions.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So the constraints are that you wish that, for example, for a prostate case, you want the minimum dose and you want maximum dose. You put a weight. Again, the weight dependent. Some computers let you 100, some let you 1,000. Rectum, you want maximum dose, and all that thing. You can actually either program them, either you can put them graphically, and every computer has a different way of optimizations. On the disease side, whether you have a prostate, head and neck, breast, whatsoever, we have to have a constraints, dose volume constraints. Without dose volume constraints, the IMRT is a meaningless. So just think about that. So you must have these functions and how we are going to do that. Once we go to that, computer is going to search for that minimum that I was telling you. It's going to start iterating, and it's going to search for minimum. And the way every computer does is very differently. The way they do it, you'll see that it's starting from a very high values, and it goes to the plateau. And at that point, you can terminate any point here or here, depending upon your liking. And some people just let it go for 300, 400 optimizations. And so that's how it is. But you have to see that function that it plateau. That means computer cannot do any better than that. Minimization is not possible any further. It has got stuck somewhere, and then you have to do some changes, either weight or either cost function somewhere that you have to do. There are a lot of things that, again, misnomer. A lot of people in the beginning of IMRT VMAT, they didn't do the inhomogeneity corrections, but I will plead to everybody, don't do any IMRT without inhomogeneity corrections. You must have that, otherwise it's meaningless. You are doing complex calculations without inhomogeneity is not a very good thing, so you must have that. Other things too is that you have to provide this again here, engine, what engine you are using. And we'll talk a little bit about the engine. The pencil beam is not a good engine for calculating in the lungs. And so you have to choose the right calculation. A lot of criteria that you can, you can build in the system, the grid size, the Fluence maps, minimum monitor units. There are a lot of these things. You can do this in the program, in your system, and then every time you don't have to do this. So these things, as a physicist, you can program upfront. What is your minimum field size? I mean, these days, minimum field size, when we take one by one, monitor units 2 by 2 is a good number, and all other things. The pencil beam is not a very good option, so that's something. Other thing is that dose volume histograms. I'm sure that everybody knows what dose volume histograms is, but we hardly look at the differential. We always look at the cumulative dose volume histograms. For a PTV or for the target, we like to see a sharp drop. I mean, that's what we want to see. And for other structure, we want to see a totally different. To view this a good plan, if you actually had a perfect plan, then you must see a delta function. That means it is the best plan at delta functions. And if it is anything deviating from delta function, is going to be. So if you are doing a plan, you should watch this, but if you have an option, look for the differential dose volume histograms, because that will help you visualize and slightly better. In optimizations, again, optimization is that the engine is working through trying to find minimizations and all other things which I talked about. The thing is that the computer didn't know anything how you are going to deliver that dose. And so it based on, if you are in old days, I showed you that we were making the mimic, we were using the multi-leaf collimators. Once you have the collimator depends on whether you have 1 centimeter width, 5 millimeter width, or 2.5 millimeter width. Your calculation is going to deteriorate. It's going to change totally. In an ideal plan, when you saw, it will be very different. But when it comes to MLC plans, it's totally different. So some of the computers, they let you choose at the end MLC calculated dose. But nowadays, most of them are intertwined, and then they go simultaneously. They calculate, and then they also do the MLC optimizations, and then they come up with the plan. But ultimately, you have to just worry about that particular aspect. Let's talk a little bit about the step and shoot schematic. The step and shoot schematic is that if I have a PTV, if I have a structure, I can divide that structures based on the digital nature in a different way. So I can deliver that dose, then I can deliver that dose, then I can deliver that dose, then I can deliver further dose, and I can deliver other dose, and then you can see at the last that I can get a distribution. So that distribution actually in reality is decomposed in many of those MLC leaf patterns. That's what the MLC leaves are doing in the background. And so that dose distribution is split into many of these aspects. Now, sorry, there's one more slides here, but it somehow got lost. Anyway, the other one was that dynamic. And so other aspect is that we can create the Fluence map based on the MLC position. So for example, if I leave MLCs here, the Fluence will be like a square thing. If I let the MLC move constantly, then my dose distribution will be this 45 degree. I can make Fluence like this. I can make Fluence like this, depending upon how I move this. This concept basically leads to a dose distribution in time, depending upon how I move the motion. This concept actually originally was proposed by Thomas Bortfeld, who is now at MGH. He wrote the first paper on this one in PI, and he proposed that we can do dynamic dose distribution. And that led us to the sliding window schematic. So what we are going to do now is that if you think about the previous dose distribution, we can make it in a sliding window. And in the sliding window, over time, I'm changing the time, I'm changing the MLCs. And as I go on changing all the MLCs, that will give me the dose distributions that you see over here. This dose distribution is composition of all the MLCs based on the motions that as you see here. And this was proposed earlier, and now it has become part of the mainstream dose, that how we provide the dose in the patients. And you can see that pictorially the intensity are changing depending upon the situations. That led a graduate student, Carl Otto, in 2008. He said, why I want to do the MLC step by step? Why not I just change the whole thing by simply moving the gantry and arc? The word VMAT was a controversial because there was a lawsuit between Electa and they settled it. There was argument who invented the word VMAT, but anyway, it was Carl Otto, and then Carl, he sold his idea to Varian, and so the Varian adopted this VMAT. And the concept was very simple, that you saw that Thomas Bordfeld's paper, the one which I was describing you, that MLC as they move, we can create the dose distributions or the Fluence Map, and based on the Fluence Map, we can achieve that goal. So the VMAT basically become a revolutionary ideas that everything is changing. So the gantry is changing, MLC is changing, and all that. And based on that, we can actually create sinogram, and also we can create the dose distributions that we see today in terms of. Going back now, that one can say that people always want to have a different energy choice at a different site. And that was one topic that they told me that I should discuss about. And to really read about this energy choices, I would suggest you all to read Andrea's paper from UCSF, when at that time she was in UCSF, 2002, and she actually provided one of the best paper on this subject written, Beam Energy and Number of Fields for a photon-based IMRT. So for any combinations, she provided a lot of data, and then she convinced me at least that here is the final finding from her graphs, that looking at the conformity index, and if you look at the number of the beams over here for different energies, if you increase the number of beams, it doesn't matter whether you have 6 MV, 10 MV, or 18 MV beam, you can achieve the same goal distribution. So bottom line is that if you have a number of beams increased to 7 or 9, it doesn't matter really that whether you're using higher beam. I said so the higher beam, the problem is that once you have the higher beam, it has its own problem, neutrons and other problem. So it's always good to go with low energy beams. And in fact, for the lungs, the low energy is the optimum choice. So I recommend my dosimetrists to stay with the 6 MB beam and have larger beam. But in a VMAT, the beam doesn't matter because it's a 360-degree rotations or 180-degree rotation. So in VMAT, the energy does not play a role as one should. So that's something to take. And if you want to still read, you should go back to the Andrea Pirskal's paper. Coming back to another question, Carl Otto's concept about what happens to the collimator angle, because we never talked about the collimator angle so far. The collimator angle optimization does play a role because here's a couple of thought for you. MLCs can be made in many ways: centered, intrusive, non-intrusives, and collimator rotations. If you see that in the collimator rotation optimizations, it stay with the contour, whereas in these situations, it's under or over. So it is important that we must do that collimator angle rotations. I presented this long time ago for various disease sites. It seems that target volume you can cover, that doesn't matter. But when you go to the OAR, collimator angle does play a very important role. And now it is, sorry, and for the prostate, the same thing. And now we agree that at least 15 to 30 degree collimator angle for VMAT is a good option. So remember, don't leave collimator angle at 0. Rather, you need to do it 15 to 30. The other topic I was supposed to cover is that what is a good plan? That is very, very difficult question to answer. If I tell you, what is the good food to eat? Well, it just depends on the person. A good plan for me may not be good for you, but subjectively, we can come up with a scientific way of looking what is a good plan. Okay, in that term, there are things to talk about. The concept of prescription and indices, and here is the dose volume histograms for a PTV. Here is another dose volume histograms for a PTV. Now see here that this particular line we are talking about is that, and I'll come back to why I'm drawing all these things. So this is the 100%. Here is also that different notations, and these various indices are described by ICRU 83. ICRU 83 provided the prescription for the IMRT, just like ICRU 50 provided. So let me just go a little bit more detail about the concept. So a good plan, conformity index was introduced, which stands for PIV divided by PTV. And so conformity index has to be close to 100. Think about that way. There is another index, homogeneity index, that is the D2. D2 is the maximum dose defined in ICRU 83. By D98 is the minimum dose. So the maximum dose minus minimum dose divided by median dose, which is D50. So D2 minus D98. If D2 and D98 are the same, that means it will be a step function. That values goes to 0. So homogeneity index has to be 0 for a good plan. And there is another term, gradient index, which ICRU 91 introduced, the PIV half by PIV. This one is mainly used for SRS and SPRT, but these two quantities are used in IMRT. If you have a method to check your plan, look for these values, HI. If HI should be close to 0, you can never get 0. But I should say the 0.2 is acceptable. So your HI should be lower than 0.2. And that is what I would recommend in terms of a good plan. And you can think about. Now going back to, I have to give you some more satisfactory or maybe disturbing news for you. So we did very large study. We actually compared from various treatment planning systems. So we gave them one data, we gave them volume, we gave them everything, we gave them the constraints. We told them, give this constraint here, and give us a plan. And you can see that each of these centers, they give you this plan, how to trust and which one to say that this is a good plan. And it's that variability is mind-boggling. Same thing is shown in the OAR. Look at it. We ask for these 3 points, and people give totally different results from different treatment planning system. The next set of study we did was that interplanar variations. That means myself and Afia and others, we said, okay, we have the same constraints, same treatment planning system. Let's do the plan. And you can see that even in those systems, we have a large variations. There is no single value. Why there is no single values? Because remember, go back to the minimization process, there's no way everybody can get the same values that which we were talking about. That there is this paper I wrote in 2008. It was in JNCI, highly touted paper all over on television. 800 patients we compared, and we say that what people are delivering the dose, and we see that large variation. Actually, if you read ICRU 83, ICRU 83 took this paper and they said, we are going to adopt prescriptions for D50. This was the paper where they adopted median dose should be prescribed. We extended this study, which was published a few years ago, in over 5,200 patients from 10 institutions. And we asked the same question. Can you tell us where you are prescribing the dose, what dose you are giving? Are you giving D100, D98, D95, all that things? And you can see that it's all over. So you may feel good about that. I'm not the outlier. There are other people who are outliers. It's not exact solutions. The IMRT is not exact solutions. So, but then there are certain things that we have to live. We also ask that how people are describing the doses, and you can see that even though ICRU told them to prescribe the D50, still people like to prescribe 95% and 95%. You see this green line, it's spiky all over this particular one. That means that people still carry 3D concept. There are institutions that D100 and D90. So these are just for your thought. Coming back to ICRU 83, ICRU 83 provided a lot of good information. So just like ICRU 50, ICRU 83 provided for the IMRT or modulated beam, and it provided lots of information that you should. To summarize, 83, it defined the maximum dose to D2. That means the 2% dose will be called maximum dose. You remember, in old days, it used to be 1 cc volume was always defined as a Dmax, but in ICRU, it is D2. Median dose, which is close to prescription dose, they said that this will be reference dose for IMRT D50. And that comes from my paper, the 2008 paper in JNCI. D98, they compared that as a minimum dose that must be reported, and there are other things that they talk about, the subvolumes and other things. So you can read in the ICRU 83. If you are AAPM members, you should be able to download all these ICRUs. This ICRU 83 should be free to you. This used to be $200, the book. So now you can get it free. Dose reporting, obviously the ICRU wanted you to provide a lot of data, D2, D95, D98, D50, and PRV, and V10 and V20, and a lot of, because why they wanted is that we can then compare the outcome data from one institution to the other, or from one protocol to the other. So that's what they want. Let's talk a little bit about very dear to you about the IMRT QA. And every time people think, my God, my IMRT fails all the time, and what should be acceptable norm and what not should be. So just for yourself, this was a study done at MD Anderson. 13,000 patients they analyzed, and you can see that the fail rate is still there. You can see here that not all the patients passes the criteria. Rather, it goes to -10 and +10. So plus minus 10% variation. If you look at the cumulative aspect of it, you see that if we take a 90% passing rates, I mean, here are some good statistics. The mean is 97.7, and 95th percentile is 92, and in that around 13,000 measurements. So you have to think about that. There will be some plans which are going to fail, and there is a lot of artificial intelligence, a lot of processes that underway that we can predict which plans are going to fail. But just to think for yourself that. So what are the challenges? Obviously, the challenges for IMRTs right now have to rush fast. Challenges are that we must have a volume. Obviously, the volume is not under our control. 10 physicians draw 10 different volumes. So note that. Motion in IMRT, we never accounted. So the IGRT is the integral part. In homogeneity, correction must be done. There is no exception. In dosimetric dose calculation engine, choose the right engine. Pencil beam, do not use for lung. Do not use. Convolution superpositions and collapsed cones, these are all the best things. And there's other topics Afia was talking about that she has listened my small field quite a bit. A small field is a problematic, not only but for the IMRT and SBRT and all, because all that's down to a small fields because that's all delivery. And so you must incorporate dosimetry, and some of them they don't provide a good results when you go to the smaller field size. So, but just you have to think about that. IMRT, it's the best and best, no question, but you have to be very, very careful. Here is some examples. This is the head and neck case, and you can see that at the end of the treatment, the poor patient has a severe skin toxicity. And we have reasons why those skin toxicities were there. So pay attention to thermoplastic fixation devices that can act as a gap. Avoid steep glancing beam angle, you know, that obliquity factor. And other problem is that do not let PTV go close to the surface, because if you have PTV close to surface, optimizations will dump all the monitor units close to the surface. So just remain away from there. You can also contour the skin avoidance and use the proper constraints factors. There's some more complications. This is a paper from Switzerland, and here is that paper with IMRT of head and neck case. But this is not only radiation problem, but it's also the chemotherapy. So the chemotherapy combined with that radiation, you can see that the poor patient's skin is all blistered, and it's all, so it has a many component of the complications. And in that case, they have grade 3 to 4 toxicities, and obviously bolus and skin doses, those you need to consider. I was supposed to talk a little bit about the pacemaker, and obviously I just said that it's out of context, but I just put 2 slides for you. TG203 have done a great job on providing a concise data, and this TG203 is also in the same line as the American College of Cardiology, that they also published another paper in the same line. Findings are identical. So what is that they want you to do? Well, avoid anything related to the neutron. That means you're not going to have energy higher than 10 MV. Remember, we were talking about the choice of energy. So just to stay lower than 10 MV. For a pacemaker, they increased this number to 5 gray, but I would stay with the 2 gray just to be safer side. And sorry. And this cartoon from that TG203 is the best one to remember. If you are in this region, you can, majority of the time you can get 5 gray. If you are here 2 to 5 gray, if you are doing a prostate, the pacemaker will never get anything. So this cartoon gives you a very, very good idea about the dose, and you can stay over there, and obviously you can read. It's a long article, but you can read that TG203. So in ending note, I think I'll leave some time for the question answers, which is important. So modulated treatment, IMRT VMAT, is complex and require a lot of thought process, a paradigm shift from the 3D CRT. You will agree. Because of the complexity, it requires constant QA, upkeep, and repair. That is something you need to know. It also requires knowledge. You cannot ask a dosimetrist, hey, do the IMRT. I mean, you need a training and understanding. And I tried to put some fundamentals in the very beginning, that they should know what component we are talking about, what we are talking in the IMRT. The modulated beams have proven in every disease sites to be the outcome. If you actually look at it, the outcomes are now coming up. I mean, outcomes are phenomenally much higher than 3D, and it provides the much lower. And obviously, AAPM does a very good job on any subject. You can get the task group reports. And if you ever need to know more about this book of mine, it was published last in the middle of COVID. It was published by IOP in England, and a lot of things I talked about is in the book. And the book is interactive. Actually, if you get the electronic copy, you can play the images and you can see the cartoonic approaches and all that thing. So